says here, young people are going to lead the country out of today's mess. We need to truly understand how racism shows up in their lives rather than fantasize about them being post-racial. I'm really kind of excited to hear what Michael has to say about the white fragility among the millennials and what that experience is like, and how that's so much different, I'm sure, than what we are all experiencing as post millennials, or whatever we are, old people, older. As far as announcements, I'd like to pull up the announcement sheet here. There are a couple of things here that I need to share with you. Let's see, where did my announcements go? There they are. Okay. And you all have this list of announcements also. And if you have any announcements that you want to have included, email probably Reverend Doug, because
yes,
Adrienne has been out of commission for a while. I believe she had some hip surgery. So as far as announcements, I'd like to encourage you to join again next week, because that is the final chapter, if you will, of us covering the book White Fragility. If you don't have the book, I'd strongly recommend that you get it. I just received it and have been reading it, and it's not a fast read, but it's a fascinating read. Let's see. The other thing I want to remind you all about is our luau. We're going to have our annual auction done via Zoom, which is a little something different. Let's see, what was the date on that?
September 26th, Saturday.
That's what I thought. Okay, September 26th. So it's going to be via Zoom, and we all expect you still to come. I'll show up in front of your computer with a Hawaiian drink in hand, and I have my grass skirt. I'm all about this. So be sure to get that on your calendar. Invite friends. I believe we're going to have access to seeing what some of the items are. Is it before the 26th? Will they be posted online?
No, it'll start on the September 26th.
Oh, it'll start actually on the 26th. Okay.
That's for a full week.
And I think that was the only other.
The folders.
Oh, the folders. Thank you. Yeah, I wrote that down. We're still looking for school folders. We still need about 100 more for donations. So if you have any and can drop them by at the church, there is a basket, I believe, inside the door that says specifically, go ahead and put the folders in here. If you can't get to the church, I'm sure one of us that are out bopping around can pick them up from you. I'm not out a whole lot, but I certainly would be happy to swing by and pick up folders if you have any to donate. And I think that's at this point. The board is still at work on the ministerial transition. I believe that they're going to meet this week, and you should see within the next week or two a more detailed plan as to how this transition is going to occur. And again, Adrienne is out of the office. So if you need anything, it says here you can contact Sue Klein, or you can contact Doug. Anything else for announcements that I missed, Doug?
I think that's it, Cheryl.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, let's go ahead then and get started. We're going to have our chalice lit. Somehow or another. Do we have like a video for the chalice?
I don't know of one.
Okay.
But I'm happy to play the chalice song.
We will mentally light our chalices.
Here you go. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, Evie has a lot to say this morning, apparently. Next, we're going to do our prelude. Michael's going to play The Long and Winding Road by the Beatles. And this is a really good time to kind of center your minds, your hearts, kind of focus on what we're going to be doing today. She needs to go out. She needs to go out. And kind of think about some of the things that are weighing on your heart. This might be a good time to kind of center on that and maybe share that a little bit later. Michael?
I'm gonna try to play this live for you guys, see how it sounds. Sorry about my camera. I don't know why it's doing that. Rather annoying me though. Anyway, here it is. The long and winding road that leads me to your door will never disappear. I've seen the road before. It always leads me here, leads me to your door. The wild and windy night that the rain washed away has left us here, crying for the day. Why leave me standing here? Let me go down, and many times I've cried. Anyway, you'll never know the many ways I've tried, and still they lead me back to that long, winding road. You left me standing here a long, long time ago. Don't leave me waiting here. Lead me to your door. But still they lead me back to that long, winding road. You left me standing here a long, long time ago. Don't leave me waiting here. Lead me to your door. Da, 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 da. Unmute, Cheryl. Cheryl, I think you're still muted.
Oops, thank you. Thank you. I didn't hear everything that you said. Okay, thank you, Michael. I guess you guys mute me and then I need to unmute myself. I didn't see that. Next, we're going to gather together and we are going to sing together. We are a gentle, angry people. Now, those words should come up on your screen. This is one we've sung many times, so most of you probably know it. Ready to roll?
I am ready to roll.
All right.
Yep. I totally am. Yes. Yes.
We are gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for life. We are gentle, angry people, and we are singing, singing for life. We are the land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for life. We are the land of many colors, and we are singing, singing for lives. We are the hurt and weary people, and we sing, sing for lives. We are hurt and weary people, and we are singing, singing for life. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for life. We are gentle, loving people, and we are singing, singing for lives.
There we go. Thank you again, Michael. Okay, let's all join together in our unison affirmation. We pledge to create a welcoming community that celebrates human diversity, encourages spiritual growth, fosters responsiveness to our world, and commits to the future of all children. Okay, we are now ready to hear Michael's presentation on what it's about the white millennial and what they're experiencing right now with all of the racism issues within our community, within our country. So let's sit back and enjoy hearing Michael.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Hope so. Sorry about my camera. If I could fix it, I will. I have no idea what's happening with that. Hopefully we don't, seizure warning, I guess. Jeez, I mean, that's awful. Anyway, thanks everyone for joining me. So this month we're doing a congregation book club about the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And for anyone that isn't in the loop about that. And if you still haven't read it, I definitely highly recommend that you do that as soon as humanly possible. It's a fantastic, it's an eye-opening book, especially for white people who, legitimately care about being part of the solution and not unintentionally perpetuating racism, which literally everyone does on a daily basis. And I just want to say something before I really get into it that probably goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. And that is that I'm giving this message. My intention is not to position myself above, beside, or adjacent to racism by giving this. Merely by existing, I am racist. Merely by existing, you are racist. And I understand if that when I say that to you, that sentence probably has an emotional impact on you, me calling you a racist, and your instinct is probably to get defensive. And you may be already like coming up with things you could lay out in front of me to prove that you're not a racist. And I urge each and every one of you to try and let these thoughts just kind of pass you by during this message and just while discussing racism in general. So the entire premise of D'Angelo's book is on how these patterns of behaviors, defensiveness, shame, emotional hurt, in other words, fragility, play a crucial role in defending the very thing which we claim to be against. These are the covert tools through which white supremacy dominates your conscience without your knowledge. So while I'm speaking today, remember, I'm not speaking to you because I'm more woke than you. You're not listening to me because you're more enlightened than someone who chose to spend their morning eating brunch and drinking Bloody Marys. We're not sitting here to discuss this because we're not racists. We're sitting here to discuss this because we know that we are. So I really enjoyed D'Angelo's no-nonsense take on anti-racism. I thought it was almost funny at times. And I thought she brought up a lot of really, really hard to face truths. Even though at times, like many readers, I almost felt offended by what she was saying. One of these times, which I thought really especially of note, which she brought up multiple times in the book, was this idea of thinking that kids today are so much more open-minded and essentially thinking that younger people just don't have racism, when in reality, everyone has internalized racism, no matter what your age is. Just like Cheryl was saying, we don't magically exist in a post-racial age just because we were born a little bit later. She directly calls out younger generations and presents empirical proof that racism exists in younger generations as well as older generations. And the only difference is that the wording has changed. We white people use coded language, and though we don't intend offense, or we're not overtly racist to say, we still will do and say things that are racist every day. So you may think that I'm going to sit here and try to defend our honor as a generation by saying she's wrong and she doesn't understand. And when you think about it, it would be really, really nice if she was wrong for everyone. If D'Angelo was wrong, that would mean that we don't have to do anything. We can just wait racism out. Thank God, right? Time will magically cure us. Time will cure society of systemic racism. And then once the millennials or the Gen Zs or whatever, once they're in charge, all inequity and bias will just dissolve into thin air. When you say something like kids today are more open-minded, we don't have to worry about racism in the future, you know, once the millennials take over, everything will be better. When you're saying that, here's what you really mean. Here's what you're really saying when you read between the lines. I don't want to correct my racism, is what you're saying. I want to let someone else do that in the future so that I don't have to think about it right now. You are essentially putting the responsibility of fixing all the problems all of us white people, the problems we created, and you're putting that responsibility on someone else. Now, I was discussing this book with one of my friends who's about my age, and she was pretty offended by that part in the book that directly mentions millennials. As she said, it was a bit narrow-minded of D'Angelo to say that younger people are just as closed-minded as the older generation. We are open-minded, she said. We may have implicit biases just like everyone else, but I know that we're more aware of them, and she shouldn't be making assumptions about us when she isn't a millennial herself. It was clear that she had a emotional, involuntary reaction to D'Angelo's criticism of her based on her age. And instead of continuing our discussion about race and white fragility in the book, we instead got diverted to talking about how she felt discriminated against as a millennial. In my opinion, this is a classic example of millennial fragility, white millennial fragility, which I believe is a very commonly found subset of white fragility. Millennial fragility is one reason, not the only reason, but one reason why it is so hard for people of my age to discuss racism, especially when they're trying to discuss it with like their parents or their grandparents, which is one of the hardest situations to discuss racism. So as a millennial, in just about every sense of the word, I'm just about as millennial as they come. I would like to discuss with everyone here today how to address this particular brand of fragility, because I feel that it's one of the things that I at least have some authority to talk about, that I actually kind of know about this, because I don't really feel particularly that knowledgeable, or I don't know. I don't feel that confident in my knowledge about racism, but I know this one particular area pretty well. I just feel I have a lot to learn, but I know this. Now, D'Angelo frequently mentions how white fragility is essentially a defense tactic. And by virtue of existing as humans, we develop unconsciously and consciously many social defense tactics, and we employ them every day, even when we don't realize we do. These are created because of ancient biological adaptations that are nearly impossible to overcome. You couldn't hope to overcome these impulses any more than you could hope to overcome your impulse to like eat or drink water or sleep. That's literally how deep they are. When we're afraid, we experience a deep animalistic and unavoidable response. And this response is damaging over long term, because it releases a chemical called cortisol into your body, which is essentially a stimulant. And this is, you might have also heard it referred to as like the stress chemical. It's what you release when you're under stress. And while it can have a desirable short-term effect in the face of imminent danger, like being chased by an animal or like rescuing someone from a fire, when we're exposed to too much cortisol, it leaves us really drained and tired and hurt and just lousy. And from a young age, we learn these patterns, how this works. The children's brains are just incredible. I mean, just mind-bogglingly good at detecting patterns. And so when this happens, they learn it. This pattern is easy to see and feel. And as a child, we learn this really quickly. Something scary comes along, we get scared, we feel bad. Something scary, we're scared, bad, scared, bad, scared, bad. And it gets drilled into us. We end up learning all kinds of weird ways to avoid feeling scared or feeling like we're in danger. And a huge component of this is our social adaptations, our deflection tactics, often to avoid facing the parts of ourselves that we really don't like to see, because facing that reality is incredibly scary. White fragility develops in white people, including millennials, for exactly this reason. The thought of being perceived as racist is scary because we have this idea of racist as being really bad. When the mere idea that we could be racist is brought into broad daylight where everyone around can see, we feel a tremendous amount of social pressure to prove that is not true. And the problem with this is sorry if this sounds harsh, because I'm sure everyone has done this. I'm sure I've done it. This sounds harsh, but really it's extremely selfish. It's very selfish to divert all your energy into defending yourself. I want everyone to imagine the last time, or just any time, really, anytime you gave someone else constructive criticism. Maybe it was like at work. Maybe you were talking to an employee of yours, if you're like a manager, or a fellow coworker, or maybe you were talking to your kids, giving them a direction, or perhaps you were even discussing racism or something else very heavy and important. And most likely, if you're like most people, you didn't intend to be hurtful by criticizing or giving feedback. Most of the time when it's given, it's intended to be helpful, merely to inform someone of what they're doing wrong so that they can correct it. But was that how your feedback was received? Or did the person you were correcting get defensive? Did they offer excuses, maybe, or just explanations of why they made their mistake? Did all the energy they could have been using to correct their mistake instead go towards defending their mistake? According to many psychological studies, that's the far more likely outcome. It's far more likely that a person's reaction to being criticized, no matter how well-intentioned it is overwhelmingly to become defensive. And this is because too often the receiver feels their efforts up to this point are invalidated by the criticism. In their mind, it becomes essentially your word versus theirs. It becomes a fight. In one case, the criticizer is right and the receiver is worthless and stupid. In the other, the criticizer is wrong and the receiver is justified. It becomes a fight for their very worth, which is scary. And we have this reaction. We have that impossible to control reaction. Just imagine for a second all the problems we could have solved as a society if people were actually just able to receive criticism or feedback without feeling attacked and reacting defensively. I mean, it would be insane, and that's something D'Angelo talks about in her book. She says if we could do this, it would be revolutionary, and that's so true. And so for this reason, it's really, really important that we strive to make each other feel validated in our discussions. I know why my friend responded the way she did to reading Robin DiAngelo's words about millennials. I'll admit, when I first read it, I had the exact same knee-jerk reaction. But when I really considered what she was saying, and through a tremendous effort to focus on her words and not her intentions, I didn't read more into what she was saying. She wasn't calling me a bad person. She wasn't calling me a racist. Well, she was, but not a bad racist. I understood that D'Angelo was right. She was absolutely right. And frankly, my own feelings about being criticized for being a millennial were neither here nor there in a discussion about racism and white privilege. I think regardless, though, I will explain to you why millennials will respond to this way and how anyone can maintain a productive discourse and avoid emotional reactions, because I think communication between generations about racism is incredibly important, and it's also incredibly rare. It doesn't happen that much. And so millennials, especially in this current political, economical, social climate that we're in right now, they feel as though they drew the proverbial short straw. We were basically inserted into a world where we had no say in how the rules were being made that defined our lives. And while this is true of every young generation while they're young, the difference is that previous generations objectively had more resources and they had more opportunity to figuratively take the wheel in young adulthood. This is not my opinion. This is fact. This is documented. The wealth disparity in our country has only widened and widened, leaving millennials far less wealthy than any generation before. And so far, there's little to no hope that it will improve, if we continue in the trajectory that we are. In some ways, I think many millennials feel almost as if they're kept in place by a criminally unjust system, just like people of color are. The vast majority of millennials have no say in changing the established system and will only be allowed to ascend into their positions of power when the older generations allow us to get into those positions. And whether this is true or not, we millennials need to see that it's far more productive for us to do absolutely everything we can to end systemic racism and white supremacy, because these are the largest systemic issues that perpetuate this very inequity, this inequality between the races, and yes, also between the classes, between the millennials and the boomers, Gen X, whatever it is. Any kind of inequality contributes to this system. It makes education less accessible for people with less resources. It makes healthcare less accessible, and it just makes the world unfair. It is in the best interest of pretty much everyone to fight white supremacy. So, if you happen to be engaging with a millennial in a discussion about race or white privilege or supremacy, and someone uses oh, my dog is doing the same thing, Cheryl. If this person starts using their generation or their age as a defense tactic, because it will happen. It will happen. They'll say it's different for us. We grew up in a different climate. We see things differently than you guys do. And in a lot of ways that is true, but frankly, in the ways that it relates to racism, it doesn't really matter. And so that's what we're trying to make people see. So if you're talking to someone, let me just give you a quick guide and maybe how you should do that. I'll get like a kind of an example conversation. So I think it's really, really important, and this goes for a lot of things, not just discussing race with millennials, but I think it's really important that we start by validating the experiences of the other person. And D'Angelo says this exact same thing, but this is really, I think, really important if you're talking to a millennial or someone younger. Validate their experience. For example, if you're an older person, you might say something like, I know I grew up in a really different times, and it's more expensive to be a student nowadays, or it's more expensive to get a house. It's unfair. Explain that discussing and addressing white supremacy is mutually beneficial to pretty much everyone. You might say something like, a big contributor to that inequality that you experience is because of these systems that are kept in place by white supremacy, and it's really damaging to everyone. And then what we really want to try to do is we want to focus the conversation back. We want to focus it back to addressing white supremacy, while acknowledging that you are actively doing this in a very conscious way. And this will help them see that while their own plight isn't invalid, it's just not the one that we're discussing right now. It's just not the issue. I think this happens a lot. People talk about like this. It's kind of related in my mind to like the straw man thing, where you're taking a different point and you start arguing the different point than we were discussing in the first place. We started talking about racism, and then because you're a millennial, you change it into talking about millennial struggles because that's what you're familiar with. That's less scary to you. You go, I'm a millennial. We have our own problems, and that's really not what it's about. So you need to direct the conversation back. You might say something like, at the root of so many problems, including yours, is white supremacy. And unfortunately, I'm guilty of perpetuating it every day. And then, just kind of go back, keep directing that conversation back, making it very obvious that that's what you're doing, that you're bringing that discussion back to white supremacy. I've noticed that discussing racism, especially with millennials, can be really difficult. In fact, I think more difficult than discussing it with those younger and older than me. So like if I'm discussing it with like a Gen Zer, that's easy. And if I'm discussing it with someone older than me, that's easy too. And I think that the reason is because older people have a little bit I don't want to use this as a good thing, but like they almost have a little bit more guilt about it. Like it's almost easier to get them to be humble about it. Whereas millennials, we feel taken advantage of. So it's almost harder for us to admit like, yeah, we have been taken advantage of, but we also still benefit from white supremacy if we're white. And if you're a millennial and you're not white, wow, you're just screwed, right? So I think it's really important that we understand that. I really do think that is because of our specific brand of fragility. And I really hope that this little bit of insight can maybe help some discussions to happen, because I really do think that that's where these changes start. It's that obviously big stuff has to happen too, but it's never going to happen until we start discussing these in very small situations. You know, people talking to their parents. I think that's a big one. It's a really hard one. People talking to their parents about racism and being willing to admit that everyone has racism, no matter who you are, no matter when you were born, no matter where you were born. It exists in you despite your choice in the matter. And so that's pretty much all I got. I welcome any questions or comments. We can have a little bit of time for discussion. So raise your hand or something if you want to comment, and I'll unmute you. Or you might have to unmute yourself, actually. Anyone? Jack? Jack?
Hello? Oh, yeah, okay.
You're
I
on,
wasn't
Chair.
sure I was on, and I messed up my screen here. This is not exactly on the point of racism, but hearing you speak about the millennials feeling disadvantaged, and it's true, it is harder to get ahead, and the wealth disparity makes it tougher. As a boomer age parent, I feel bad that it seems so hard for my kids to reach the levels economically and whatever that were pretty easy for us to reach. And they do have a legitimate reason for feeling in politics that the Democrats in many ways are not any better than the Republicans. And as you mentioned,
Yes.
it's all just the system, and they're never going to get a chance till the older people step aside. And this leads to considerable frustration on my part with some millennials in my family who just can't stand Biden, and they've got no faith in the Democrats, and they're probably not going to vote. And it just frightens me and disappoints me that their inaction, that they don't see what a once in a lifetime threat Trump is, and how everybody's got to pull together to beat him. So that's a
Right.
frustration of mine related to that, although I do understand their feelings. And I still do feel like, I'm just going to close by saying, the millennial generation, I think, does have a better understanding of implicit racism than our generation does. So I still have hope for some improvement.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Let me comment on that a little bit. So, I don't, to be honest, just on your very last thing there, to be honest, I don't know. I don't feel comfortable saying that we have a better understanding or not of implicit racism. I I don't know. I mean, I think that in general, the public is a little bit more aware now than they have been in the past. And so I think that helps. But I don't know that if this, I don't know that if the situation had been the same as it was 20 years ago, that we would be any better. I don't know. I mean, that's hard for me to say. But I will comment a little bit of what you said about how a lot, and this is true for a lot of millennials, they don't really identify with either party. I wouldn't really say I truly identify with either party. However, I will say that I am going to vote for Joe Biden. 100% I'm going to vote for Joe Biden. This is because millennials really, it's an emotional thing. It's an emotional reaction. Okay. And I think that we were raised kind of like in wartime, and really we've been at war for like our entire lives pretty much, and we just had all these economic struggles, and in kind of combination with that, we grew up in an era where we had all this information available to us, and it taught us that things aren't really as obvious as they appear. And so you know, like when something is presented to you, we had a really easy way of like getting on the internet and saying, no, you're wrong. And so a lot of times we don't like to accept the system that's just given to us. We don't like to accept the explanation that's just given to us. We like to do a bunch of research on our own and say, no, this is the way I'm going to interpret this. This is the way I'm going to believe it. And so I think that for a lot of people, they don't like the whole two-party system, and they don't want to be a part of that. And I think that the really important thing in addressing that and kind of and I actually agree with, I don't really like the two-party system either, but it's not productive to just hope that that would magically go away, you know? And I think that the at the root of that, addressing that really does come from validating that experience. Not giving your opinion or saying this is how you should be. You shouldn't tell millennials like you should do it this way, because they're just going to retract further if you do that. It's just not going to work. You have to just validate their experience and just say, you know what, I understand why you would think that way, because it makes sense, you know. And it's kind of, there's not a whole lot that you're going to do to change that opinion, I don't think. But I think that if millennials were given a little bit more validation that their struggles are real and that this is an objective thing, you know, it's like I said, it's not my opinion that millennials have less resources than previous generations. That's a fact. It's a documented fact. And I think that if they're given a little bit more validation, they will react less emotionally and less rationally, like the way you were saying. Sorry for that super long explanation, but there you go.
Michael, I'd like to add to what you said. You know, you're talking about, you know, validating the person's experience. I would argue that we should do that with every
Yeah.
interaction we have, of course,
Oh, yeah.
because it shows that we are listening, and we are not talking down to someone. When you're trying to understand, you have to understand before you can talk to somebody. So you have to have to understand their perspective first, so that you know how to talk to them, and validating them is essential, I think. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's at the core of this whole thing, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Diane?
All right. So I get it that millennials feel like they're not getting the validation, that we're not giving them enough recognition for what their life is like currently compared to our life. I hate saying our life because I don't think I'm in that generation either. I'm stuck between the two, and I can't remember what we're called, but that's what I am. But everybody needs validation. Every human being seeks for somebody's validation, whether it's a friend themselves, a peer, a loved one, a parent, a child. Everybody wants validation that they're okay and that they're all right and that they have value. And all of our conversations should stem from that inherent belief that's part of being you, in my opinion. That's what I was brought up to say to every human being in my interactions is you have valid. It may not be my experience, may not be the way I think, but just because I don't think the way you do doesn't mean you're wrong.
Yeah.
It means we have a different opinion and we can seek out each other's viewpoints, but it doesn't make you wrong. Now, sometimes always, we are all not perfect and we can't all do those things. But I think that we should look at many of the problems that we have society-wise right now about validation. Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter, and then you see a sign that says Blue Lives Matter, and then you see, Gay Lives Matter,
Yes.
and then you'll see, and each one of them has a purpose and
Yes.
a rationale of why they are seeking approval,
Yes.
you know? And so, you know, while it might be a millennial thing, I think it's a human thing too. Just
Oh, it absolutely is. Yes, absolutely.
that's
And yeah, you're 100% right. And that's so I maybe I should be more clear. Yes, you should validate everyone's experiences constantly. The reason I'm commenting specifically on this validation is because a lot of times I hear this not being validated. A lot of times I hear older generations diminishing the struggles of millennials because they're different struggles than they had. It's not to say that older generations didn't have struggles, but they're not the same ones that millennials have. It's not, they weren't the same systemic struggles that millennials are having. And I think too often, millennials will complain that they can't afford their rent or something, and then an older person will say, well, I had to walk to school 3 miles or something like that, and it's like, that's not what we're talking about,
right,
and it's the same thing with millennials talking about their struggles when you're talking about race. That's not what we're
right,
talking about. We're not talking about millennial struggles right now. We're talking about race. It's
right,
not that your struggles are invalid. It's just that that's not what we're talking about.
right.
Yeah.
I get you. I get you. And these days have been this month's sermons, discussions, whatever, has been very eye-opening for this
Good.
white semi-privileged person. And I
Good.
only say I'm semi-privileged because I'm not male. If I was
Mm.
white male, then I'd be all the way privileged.
Yep. Yep. I got the double whammy.
I guess Todd's got something in the comments here, and I think
Oh,
Tom Lofton.
okay. Let me, Tom or Todd, do you want to say something, or do you want me to just read this? Or Todd?
He's probably muted.
Yeah. Let me just go ahead and read what Todd says for. Oh, Todd. Okay. Let me just go ahead and read this. So Todd is saying the word racist has multiple meanings. It can mean a person who discriminates against people of other races. It also means one who believes a particular race is superior to another. I feel like, okay, yeah, his mic's not working. So I feel like that dual meaning makes it more difficult for everyone to acknowledge inherent racism because so many get defensive to prove that we don't think one race is superior to another, rather than focusing on the inherent biases we all have and how we can counter that. Yes, Todd, that's a huge part of D'Angelo's book. And that's absolutely true. When we think of the word racist, just like Doug was talking about a couple weeks ago, we have this good bad dichotomy where when we hear the word racist, we immediately think bad. And that's not really true. We don't have to think one race is superior to still be racist. You can think that, you can have black friends. You can be married to a black person and be white, and you can truly love your people of color and still be racist. It's just not mutually exclusive. So.
Tom?
Yeah, hi, thanks.
Yeah.
Michael, I think you've hit on some really important truths in your presentation today. First, structural racism is multi-generational. And it's a simple fact that corrupt systems corrupt people. And there's no escaping that. Every generation, if the systems don't change, the structural racism won't change. And I think the second truth you hit on is us boomers tend to put pressure on you to be the solution. We pat ourselves on the back that we recognize the problem, but then we put the burden on you to be the solution. Yep. And it's not unlike, Trump says about the virus that it's going to magically disappear. That's what we say about racism is thank God for the millennials because now it's going to magically disappear.
Right.
I think the challenge for millennials from an old boomer perspective is intersectionism, and you hit on that a little bit. You know, when we talk about racism, it really does intersect with the women's movement, with classism, with LGBTQ issues. But I think there's a special kind of intersectionism that's going to be challenging now. And that is, I think the challenge for millennials is to approach your Black brothers and sisters of your age and identify with the inability to really affect change that's been part of the way that all of you have grown up, and yet do it in a way that doesn't feel like you're co-opting the Black Lives Matter movement. So the real challenge is to broaden the tribe, but not to take away the racist focus. And I think that's a very difficult conversation to have. But I think that's the challenge. If we are really to really realize change in systems, it's not going to be millennials of color. It's going to be white millennials that will change that. So there has to be a tribe of young people that says enough is enough, but where you're not seen as co-opting the system. So I think that's the challenge for millennials.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I've thought about that. Not put so eloquently as you did just now, but I've thought about that. Thanks, Tom. That was great. But yes, and I think that the kind of the double struggle of that for millennials is what I was talking about before, which is that we only have access to these positions of power when we're given access by older people. And it's not the same. We don't have that same power to just take it like generations have before. And so I think that is another part of that puzzle that is really difficult and hard for millennials to face, and just makes it that much more daunting. But thanks, Tom. That's you're absolutely right. Yeah, Carol.
I've been working with the Showing Up for Racial Justice group, and we had a couple of different situations where a person of color was part of our leadership team, and she expressed real frustration and disappointment and awareness of how things were different for the white people who were on the team, and how they were for her as a person of color. And this happened a couple of different times. And in one case, the person who was called out kind of took it and listened and tried to hear the criticism, tried to didn't necessarily agree with it, but really wanted to understand it. And in another place, the person who was called out was pushed back pretty maybe the way they might have against a peer in a work setting or something. And I think one of the things that was really interesting to realize is how risky and difficult it is for a person of color to speak their feelings in that kind of a setting.
Yes.
And how, I mean, when Shelley Talklook talks about, the passion, the emotional fire, it's when somebody is speaking from that heart place of pain, we want everybody to affirm everybody else, but when they're coming from that heart place of pain, that's really not what they're going to give you. Absolutely. And if we are fragile and need affirmation all the time, that our problems are the really significant, then we're going to have a harder time hearing that emotional fire. And I mean, when I hear it, honestly, it feels to me like I'm helping somebody get a splinter out, or helping them get the pus out of a bad infection. And I just want to be as much there for them as I can.
Right.
And I just think that when racism has just, and I'm not saying there aren't other pains, but our society is hundreds of years of structural and economic and in all sorts of ways. And I want us as white folks to look at how can we be more open to and humble about and aware that there's just so much we don't know and we don't see and we don't realize. Because when we can do that, then I think, I mean, and it's not to say that every person of color's criticism is accurate, but at the same time, it's just to say those conversations are just like these little baby seedlings. And if we tell somebody how wrong they are before that seed even gets fully popped out of the shell, it's never going to grow. It's never going to be robust enough to have a conversation between equals, because racism isn't just prejudice. Racism is prejudice and power. And our society gives us as white people an enormous amount of anticipated power. And even if we think, well, we're equals to this person, we treat them as equals, that's just not what we've been trained in with our unconscious biases. And it's certainly not what people of color have been trained in their experiences of prejudice and racism, you know, day to day, and as well as generationally, as well as, you know, what their families have experienced. So the call from D'Angelo, and I just found this article she's talking about, which is called Calling In, Strategies for Cultivating Humility and Critical Thinking in Anti-Racism Education. So it's trying to say, look, as white folks, we can step up here. We've got, you know, in most cases, and not every case, but in a lot of cases, you know, we've got food on the table, we've got economic resources, we can donate, we can do good things, we can, and lots of, I mean, people of color do too, but let's kind of realize that that intersection of poverty and color and race and youth too, in some cases, and millennial, I mean, it's kind of more potent than we could even really imagine.
Definitely. And I really like what you said, Carol, about how it is super difficult and it's hard for people of color, especially to stand up to white people. And I think that is why it's so important that we be the ones to do it, because they shouldn't have to do that. You know, that's why it's so important to be the defenders as white people, you know, be the ones that can be the ones to say something. Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts, Carol.
And sometimes, though, even that can be disempowering. So sometimes you just need to be the backup person. Like,
Yeah,
let the person of color lead. And, you know, there may be certain settings where they don't feel safe stepping out. And if you step out, it's going to put the spotlight on them, whether they want it or not. It's really tricky.
It is hard. Yeah,
it's terribly tricky.
Yeah.
But it's worth making mistakes. I mean, that's the thing. If we're less fragile, we'll keep trying and we'll build skills and knowledge, and we'll do hopefully our research, so we're not doing all the learning on top of somebody of color.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Carol. Okay, one more, Ann.
Okay. I was listening the other day to a radio show, and they're talking about a new PBS movie or documentary that came out. And I can't find the name of it. I was trying to find the name of it, but it was about the 60s. It's about the 60s, and so it's and registering people to vote. But the Black community activist said that they had they put out the word for the white kids to come, and you know, and some of the other people would say, "Why are you sending them? We, you know, they're not Black, they don't have these problems, all that sort of stuff." And the answer was, because if any of these kids are hurt or killed, that these parents will be going to the legislature and to their senators and to the president, and they will make such a big noise that something will happen. Whereas if the Black person got killed, it just kind of got swept under the carpet. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I think that's the thing. And I've been looking at the women's right to vote sort of thing, and they're getting the vote, you know, and they had to convince men And so, you know, you had to get men in the lines as well, because they had the power and they could make the big fuss. So I think that's really good. If I ever find this, I'll put it on the GNH connection, what the name of the documentary is. But that was a kind of an eye opener for me.
Yes. Is it Freedom Summer?
That might be it. I'll look and
There's
see.
an article 2 days ago on Fresh Air.
Yeah.
That might be it. But then, and then as I say, it's streaming whatever the PBS thing is.
Yeah, that's very relevant. Yeah, I mean it's so hard. You know, the people in power have to be willing and have that change in them enough to be willing to give up a little bit of power, and that's unfortunately that doesn't happen enough. I would love to have everyone comment and everything, but we do need to get moving along here. So I'm going to pass the torch back to Cheryl, and we'll move this right along. Thanks, everyone, for your comments and for listening.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody's comments. I'm unmuted, right? Okay, good. So next, what we're going to do is share our wealth. During this time, Michael is going to play for us. I would like to encourage everyone to either write a check at this time or to get on the Givelify app. Income is down, as I'm sure that you all can appreciate that we have got less money coming in. A lot of that could be, you know, when you know, we write our normal checks when we come to service, but then maybe we have a $5 bill in our pocket and we throw that in the basket too. And those kind of extras are lost by doing Zoom. So I know that financially we're a little stuck. So if you can give a little bit extra today, that would be great. Michael, you're on.
All right. So I just want to say this is a song I wrote, and it's kind of it was the most relevant thing I could think of, because it's kind of about that bittersweet moment when you realize that you've been seeing things wrong. And that's both sad and liberating at the same time. So this one is called Vision.
Have I been asleep? Am I just hungover? Drunk in a dream world. Now I'm far too sober. It seems so silly now. Yesteryear's wonder can shout all I want, won't drown out the thunder. Maybe I've tricked myself all this time. I'm not who I think. And if it's true, maybe it won't be so bad to lose everything. 'Cause nothing is real. My vision corroded. All that I've seen, this old time is eroding. No. So I embraced the truth and hoped it would relinquish me. I'm not suited for weaving webs of deceit. Trap myself in my prayers of free. So a total reality changing order for me. Honesty is the best policy I can see. I cannot believe I'm naive I was being, cause I was assuming that everyone believed the truth. In a perfect world it would not be too much to ask for a little truth, but it seems these days it's flashing out by those who before their hearts splitting in two. Maybe I've tricked myself all this time to be someone else. Where do I go when I don't even know how to be myself? But nothing I made. I can recall it's too far away now. But I've grown comfortable blinded, content with the world I can see. But the curtain is open behind me, and my eyes don't deceive me. I've opened up, finally I'm free. I've got so far to go still, but at least I can see. So apologies if I don't recall your face. You see, the years haven't changed me. I don't feel the same. But nothing is real. My vision corroded. All that I've seen this whole time is eroding. I don't wanna know how big a mess I made. I can recall it's too far away now. But I've grown comfortable blinded, content with the world I can see. But the curtain is open behind me, and my eyes don't deceive me. My eyes don't deceive me.
That was great, Michael. I really like that song. You played it for service before, and I really love it. Thanks.
Thank you.
At this time, we can share a brief joy or sorrow. If you want to either unmute yourself and go ahead and start, or flag one of us down, we'd like to hear what you have to share. Is there anybody out there with joys or sorrows?
Haley turned 15 on Friday.
Oh, that's
my
cool.
joy and my sorrow.
Robert Malcolm had a birthday this past week. Happy birthday, Robert.
Happy birthday, Robert.
Girls started school on Friday, and went pretty well. Right now they're 2 days on and 3 days remote, so 2 days in person and 3 days remote. So there's only about 40% of the students on the campus when they're there. So I'm hoping that they might just keep it that way the whole semester, and maybe be able to keep it that way the whole semester, because I know they're planning on trying to go back to everybody.
That's expensive, isn't it? Only 40% of the students there.
I'm sorry.
You need a lot more teachers. It's expensive, isn't it?
Well, they're doing, the teachers have Zoom, the teachers are being recorded for the first 15-20 minutes of each class. And so that's sort of the remote learning that the other students are getting. And it's tricky, and we don't know exactly how well it'll all work out. But I think the fact that some of the students who are getting the remote learning are also in class will help the teachers be better informed about what's working and what's not. And then
I believe that's important.
Yeah, some 20% are staying home full time. I've already opted that. And a friend of ours, her daughter had a sleepover a week ago with a girl who's just come back tested positive. So keep her in your thoughts, and So far, my girls are okay, but it's all around.
That's where my Kaylee's staying home the whole time. I can't do it. I couldn't put her back in school.
As some of you probably already know, my pseudo sister, I guess that's what I call her, she and her entire family had COVID. She was in the hospital for a couple of days, but her son-in-law, my nephew-in-law, died from COVID on Thursday. He was 38 years old, and he'd been
sorry.
in the hospital for a month on the ventilator. They'd only been married 2.5 years, and it was actually her 32nd birthday on Thursday when he died. I went up with them to the hospital, and I was in the room with my sister and her daughter during all that time on Thursday. So I drove up to Toledo and then drove back. So I'm still kind of pretty tired.
Yeah.
They were very, very, very poor. And now she's going to have to move back in with her mom because she has no job, and they weren't able to access his unemployment because he was in a coma and they didn't have his password. So they should be getting some back monies from his unemployment, but it's and they're millennials, you know, or she is 32, but they've really been disenfranchised in many ways, and then now COVID has taken her husband, and it really sucks.
Mel posted a comment in the chat.
Okay, I got to get to chat. Where do I get to there? More chat. Okay, Mel says he's scheduled for surgery to remove a polyp from his vocal cord on the 2nd. He'll have a COVID test this Wednesday and will be quarantined from Wednesday then until his surgery date.
We'll pray, worry about you.
What? Shh. Okay, no other joys or sorrows. Okay, let's all sing together then. Our world is one world.
Seas
Okay, well, thank you very much. We are, I've got some closing words here that kind of fit quite well with a comment, some comments that Michael made about that visceral anxiety feeling that we experience when we feel like we're having to defend ourselves. That whole, that stress response, if you will, with the all this noise in my house, with the cortisol and all that. And I've got a quote here by Ta-Nehisi Coates. But all our phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscles, extracts organs, cracks bones, and breaks teeth. You must never look away from this. You must always remember the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, the charts, the regression all land with great violence upon the body. So we may experience that visceral anxiety when faced with our racism, but this is reinforcing the fact that those who are recipients of racism experience it much more deeply. Thank you, everyone. I hope you stick around for the little breakout groups. And my final words are keep the fire burning. Thanks, everybody.
I love that. Keep the fire burning.